The wind carried the scent of pine and rusted metal as Jack Morgan guided his old truck along the cracked mountain road. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, pushing aside thin ribbons of fog that clung to the trees. In the back seat, his 8-year-old son Noah slept beneath a patched blanket, his small hand clutching a worn toy truck. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He wasn't sure if he was running away or towards something. The only certainty was they couldn't spend another night behind the gas station dumpster. The truck coughed and sputtered as they climbed higher, the engine protesting each curve of the winding road. A handwritten sign leaned crooked beside the road. County foreclosure auction. Abandoned property. Pine Lake. Minimum bid $20. Jack almost laughed when he saw it. $20. Less than the cost of a hot meal. Less than the pity money people tossed into his cup outside the diner. Still, something about those words, abandoned property by the lake, stirred a faint spark inside him. He slowed the truck, looked back at Noah sleeping peacefully, and whispered to himself, maybe this is the sign I've been waiting for. The auction wasn't much. 2 county officials, a plastic folding table, and a stack of dusty papers. Richard Blackwood stood nearby, an expensive suit hanging perfectly from his tall frame, scrolling through his phone with manicured fingers. He looked up when Jack approached, eyes narrowing at the sight of worn jeans and 3-day stubble. The property had been left behind by a man who died without family, they explained. No electricity, no plumbing, no guarantee of anything standing. Jack listened quietly, the last $24 in his pocket burning like coals. When the bidding began, Richard's eyes glittered with amusement. A homeless man at an auction. The joke would make for good dinner conversation later. $20, Jack said, his voice rough but steady. The man with the clipboard blinked, nodded, and wrote it down. Sold, he announced. Just like that, Jack owned a house. He expected laughter, maybe a joke about fools and their money, but the officials only handed him a rusted key and a torn map. Good luck, one of them muttered. Blackwood's expression darkened momentarily before he adjusted his tie. Waste of time, Blackwood remarked as he headed toward his Cadillac. I'd planned to develop that whole lakefront, but trust me, you'll be begging to sell that death trap within a month. His laughter lingered in the air long after his car disappeared around the bend. As Jack climbed back into the truck, Noah stirred. Did we find a place, Dad? He asked, rubbing his eyes. Jack hesitated, then smiled faintly. Yeah, kid, we just bought ourselves a house. The road wound through thick forest, narrowing until the truck's tires crunched over gravel and fallen pine needles. When they finally reached Pine Lake, the world fell silent. The water stretched smooth as glass, reflecting the deep purple of the evening sky. Across the lake stood stone walls, a sagging porch, and a crooked chimney that looked ready to fall. It didn't look like much, but to Jack, it looked like salvation. He parked by the shore and cut the engine. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't all empty. It felt like a beginning. They crossed the narrow wooden bridge leading to the property. Each board groaned beneath their steps, echoing into the quiet. The house sat half buried in the hillside, built from rough stones darkened by rain and years. Moss clung to the roof. A faded sign hung above the door, letters barely readable. Pine Haven. Jack traced them with his fingers. Haven, he murmured. That's all we need. The door creaked open with a tired sigh. Dust drifted through the air like old memories, but the floor held steady beneath their feet. For a man used to sleeping on cold pavement, that felt like luxury. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and damp stone. The main room was bare except for a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace blackened with soot. Noah ran his fingers across the table's surface, leaving trails in the dust. It's old, he said softly. Yeah, Jack replied, but so am I. They both laughed, the sound echoing strangely off the walls. For a while, they worked in silence, Jack sweeping Noah, dragging in dry branches from outside. When the first fire crackled in the hearth, warmth spread through the room like a heartbeat returning to a sleeping body. They ate canned beans by firelight, their shadows dancing on the walls. Noah leaned against his father's shoulder, half asleep. Do we get to stay here? He murmured. Jack hesitated. The roof might leak, the walls might crumble. The whole thing could collapse by morning. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he kissed his son's hair and whispered, Yeah, Noah, this is home now. Outside, the lake shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Somewhere deep in the water, a ripple spread across the surface, though no wind stirred the trees. Jack woke before dawn to the sound of dripping water. For a second, panic gripped him, the kind that came from years of waking up in strange places, never knowing what danger might be waiting. But when his eyes adjusted, he saw it wasn't rain. It was condensation dripping from the stones near the fireplace. The air carried the faint scent of earth, almost metallic. He placed a hand on the wall. It was warm. "That's odd," he muttered. The fire had died hours ago, yet the stones retained heat like they'd been baking in summer sun. Outside, fog rolled across the lake, soft and glowing, like the world itself was breathing. As the morning light crept in, Jack found a small wooden box tucked beneath the hearth. It was covered in soot and bound with a leather strap. Inside were yellowed papers, old letters, receipts, and a photograph of a man standing by the same lake, smiling proudly. On the back was written, "To whoever finds this, take care of this place. It remembers kindness." Jack turned the photo over again and again. The man's face seemed familiar, though he couldn't say why. He tucked the picture into his jacket pocket, feeling an odd comfort he hadn't known in years. The next few days were slow and quiet. They patched the roof with scrap tin from the shed and cleaned out the fireplace chimney. Jack fixed the front door hinge using nails scavenged from an old fence. Noah spent hours by the lake stacking stones into little towers. Each evening they cooked over the fire and talked about things they missed. Hot showers, Mom's old guitar, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Yet every night as the fire dimmed, Jack noticed something strange. The walls seemed to hum softly, almost like they were listening. At first he thought it was just the sound of wind moving through cracks in the stone. But the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the floor. Noah noticed it too. "The house is purring," he said one night, pressing his ear to the wall. Jack chuckled, but didn't correct him. In truth, the sound made him uneasy, though not in a bad way. It was as if the house had been waiting a long time for someone to come back, and now that they had it, was finally exhaling. One morning they woke to find something written on the fogged window near the kitchen. 3 words, faint but clear. "You are safe." Noah swore he hadn't done it, and Jack knew he hadn't either. He wiped the words away, but when he looked again, an hour later, they had reappeared. He stood there for a long time, his reflection blurred against the glass. Maybe it was moisture forming patterns. Maybe it was something else. Either way, he whispered a quiet thank you just in case someone or something was listening. The lake became their rhythm. They washed clothes by its edge, skipped stones, and sat quietly as the sun set behind the ridge. Some nights Jack thought he saw faint lights under the surface moving slowly like fireflies trapped beneath the water. Noah called them the lake's dreams. When Jack asked what he meant, the boy shrugged. "It dreams like people do," he said about who it used to love. Jack didn't argue. Somehow that explanation felt right. The lake, like him, had seen too much loss and was just waiting to remember how to feel again. Days turned into weeks. The 20 house became more than shelter. It became their heartbeat. Jack found old tools in the shed and started repairing what he could. He assessed each beam with professional eyes, mentally calculating load-bearing capacities and structural weaknesses the way he'd done for 20 years before losing everything. His hands remembered skills his mind had tried to forget: how to measure twice and cut once, how to find the grain in salvaged wood, how to coax straight lines from warped materials. He replaced broken floorboards, mended window frames, and painted the front door a faded blue, just like the one from their old home. Noah painted a crooked sun beside it, declaring it luck. Every improvement made the house feel warmer, more alive. Jack was replacing rotted wood on the porch when a pickup truck rattled over the bridge. His body tensed old instincts from months of being chased from one temporary shelter to another. But the woman who stepped out wasn't there to evict them. Her gray hair was braided down her back, and clear eyes took measure without trespassing. "Name's Martha Wilson," she said. "I run the market in town. Heard someone finally claim Pine Haven." Her gaze traveled over the porch, the patched roof, the painted blue door with Noah's son. "Place looks steadier," she added. Jack wiped his hands and introduced them both. Martha set a box on the table. "Potatoes, eggs, 2 jars of blackberry jam." "Welcome," she said simply. "Pay me when life allows." Martha settled into a chair, not needing an invitation. "The same chair William Gardner sat in," she said, nodding to the photograph Jack had propped against the wall. 40 years he lived here, studying the lake and those strange lights. People thought he was chasing ghosts, But William was a scientist before anything else. Geology, I think. She tapped her temple. Sharp mind, kind heart. Noah appeared at Martha's elbow, curious about this visitor who spoke of the man in the photograph. Martha smiled at him. "You've got his curious eyes," she told Noah, though she meant William, not Jack. When William died, the county took the property. Been sitting empty since, nobody wanted it, what with the stories. Jack's interest piqued. "What stories?" Martha waved a hand dismissively. "Just old talk." William claimed the house was alive somehow. Said it spoke to him through the walls. Said the lake had healing properties. She shook her head. After his family died in that flood back east, he wasn't quite right, but harmless. The most gentle soul you'd ever meet. When Martha left, Jack found himself staring at the photograph again. William Gardner, a scientist who believed his house was alive. Maybe grief had broken his mind. Or maybe Jack placed his palm against the wall, feeling that strange warmth again, listening to the rhythmic humming that came every 27 seconds, like clockwork. That night, Jack found an old ledger in the wooden box. William's handwriting filled the pages with observations about the lake water, temperatures, mineral content, unusual light phenomena. But interspersed were personal notes. House spoke again today. 27-second intervals. Stronger near the hearth. Temperature increases with emotional states. Responds to gratitude and care. Seems to be protecting me from my darker thoughts. Jack closed the ledger unnerved. It was one thing for Noah to anthropomorphize their new home. Children did that naturally. But William had been an educated man, a scientist. What had he experienced here that made him believe stone walls could listen? And why did Jack feel increasingly that they were not alone in this house? The answer came unexpectedly when Noah discovered a curious pattern in the stone walls. "Dad, look," he called one evening. The fading sunlight hit the wall at just the right angle, revealing faint symbols carved into the rocks. Intricate patterns that seemed to form a map or diagram. Jack ran his fingers over them, feeling how they'd been deliberately etched into the hard surface. They hadn't been visible before. They only appeared when the light struck, just so. Jack sketched the symbols in an old notebook, studying their arrangement. They reminded him of hydrological charts he'd seen years ago, flowing lines that might represent water currents or underground streams. Some stones were positioned deliberately to catch and reflect light toward the lake at specific times of day. That night, Jack dreamed of Rebecca. She stood by the lake's sunlight in her hair, the way she'd looked before the cancer. She smiled at him but didn't speak. When he reached for her, she dissolved into blue light that sank into the water. He woke with tears on his face and the walls humming louder than before. 27 seconds between pulses. Like a heartbeat. Like something waiting. Noah started school at the local elementary where he was immediately labeled the boy from the haunted lake house. Jack worried about him being teased, but Noah seemed to wear the designation proudly. He tells me stories Noah told a classmate during lunch. "The lake shows me pictures when I'm sleeping." The other children gathered around, half scared, half fascinated. "What kind of pictures?" they asked. Noah just smiled. "Good ones. About the old man who lived there before and how he found the special water that fixed his broken heart." News of their presence spread through the small town. Some neighbors drove by, slowly curious about the strangers fixing up William Gardner's old place. A few stopped to introduce themselves, bringing small housewarming gifts, a second-hand blanket, a box of nails, a bag of apples. Jack accepted their kindness with the awkward grace of a man unaccustomed to receiving help. Each time someone new arrived, the humming in the walls intensified as if the house were paying attention. Jack began picking up carpentry jobs in town, his skilled hands quickly earning a reputation. He charged less than he should have, grateful for any work. The money went into a mason jar labeled taxes that he kept hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace. The property tax bill he'd found in the old mailbox had nearly stopped his heart. $8,500 due in 60 days, or the county would reclaim the property. Even working every daylight hour, he wasn't sure he could earn enough in time. He told Noah nothing about this looming threat. The boy was finally sleeping through the night, no longer startling awake with the nightmares that had plagued him since Rebecca died. Here, surrounded by stone walls that hummed like a lullaby, Noah seemed to be healing. Jack wouldn't risk that peace unless he had to. But the house knew. Jack could swear the humming changed when he counted the money in the tax jar each night, growing faster when the amount increased, slowing to a mournful pace when it seemed hopeless. 27 seconds between pulses. Always 27. One night studying William's ledger by firelight, Jack found a notation: 27 equals 3 by 3, the perfect cube. Stability, foundation, home. And beside it, a scribbled afterthought: Rebecca says I'm overthinking it. Maybe it's just the house's heartbeat. Jack froze. Rebecca Williams' wife had been named Rebecca too. He flipped back through the ledger, finding earlier entries that mentioned her. Rebecca doesn't believe me about the house being alive, but she humors me. She loves it here regardless. Says the lake reminds her of where she grew up. It was coincidence, nothing more. But it unsettled Jack deeply. He'd chosen this place on impulse, driven by desperation and the last of his money. What were the odds he'd find himself living in a house once owned by a man who'd also loved a woman named Rebecca, who'd also felt the house was somehow alive? The roof still needed major repairs before winter. Jack salvaged what materials he could, but some things had to be purchased. Each dollar spent on the roof was one less in the tax jar, yet he couldn't risk Noah getting sick from sleeping in a leaky house. The compromise kept him awake at night, staring at ceiling beams and listening to the walls hum. Noah continued bringing home stories from school. Mr. Wilson in the grocery store says Williams was a famous scientist. He reported one evening, as they ate dinner by firelight, he discovered something important about the lake, but nobody believed him. They thought he was crazy. Noah looked up at Jack with serious eyes. But we know he wasn't crazy, right? The house really does talk, and the lake has dreams. Jack didn't know how to respond. Part of him, the practical craftsman who'd built houses for 20 years before losing everything, knew buildings were just materials assembled by human hands. They didn't live, didn't think, didn't care who sheltered within them. But another part, the part that had felt warmth radiating from stone walls on cold nights, that had seen words appear on fogged windows, that had noticed how the roof seemed to hold together despite missing key structural supports, wasn't so sure anymore. He was repairing the dock by the lake when he saw it, a flickering blue light beneath the water, pulsing at the now familiar 27-second interval. Jack knelt, watching it move beneath the surface like a living thing. It wasn't a reflection. The sky was overcast. It wasn't algae or phosphorescence. It was too regular, too purposeful. It approached the dock, hovering just below where he sat, as if observing him in return. Without thinking, Jack reached down, his fingers breaking the water's surface. The light surrounded his hand with gentle warmth. For one breathless moment, he felt what could only be described as recognition, like being remembered by someone who knew you long ago. Then the light retreated, disappearing into deeper water. That night, the humming in the walls was louder than ever. Noah sat with his ear pressed against the stone, nodding, as if listening to a conversation. He says it's almost time, Noah announced. Jack looked up from the fireplace. Who says what's almost time? The house, Noah replied matter-of-factly. It says the water is rising. It says we need to be ready. Jack checked the weather forecast the next day at the library in town. No rain predicted for the next week. The lake level was normal for this time of year. Yet he couldn't shake Noah's words or the certainty with which the boy had delivered them. The water is rising. We need to be ready. The next morning, the sound of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Jack looked up from his work to see a sleek black Cadillac crossing the bridge gravel, pinging against its immaculate finish. Richard Blackwood stepped out, looking even more out of place in his tailored suit than he had at the auction. Two men in matching polo shirts emblazoned with Blackwood Enterprises followed, carrying a survey equipment. Quite the fixer-upper you have got here, Morgan Blackwood called, his voice carrying across the yard. Jack straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, acutely aware of his worn clothes and the 3-day stubble on his chin. Must admit you've done more with it than I expected. Blackwood continued, surveying the repaired porch and fresh blue paint on the door. But I've been doing some research on this property. Did you know there are 3 years of back taxes owed? His smile didn't reach his eyes. County's likely to auction it again if they're not paid soon. Jack's stomach tightened. He'd known about this year's taxes, but 3 years' worth. That would be over $25,000, an impossible sum. I represent investors interested in developing this lakefront, Blackwood said, gesturing expansively. Luxury homes, private docks. We're willing to offer $30,000 for your... Interest in the property. Cash today. Enough to pay those taxes and start fresh, somewhere more suitable for a child. The walls of the house seemed to vibrate with tension. Jack felt it through his feet, an anxious hum that quickened from its usual rhythm. Something told him Blackwood wasn't being truthful about the taxes, about his intentions, about something fundamental. I need to see those tax records myself, Jack replied, keeping his voice level. And I'm not interested in selling. Blackwood's smile thinned. Let me be clear, Morgan. This is a courtesy call. My company is acquiring all the lake frontage for our development. Your squatting here is a temporary inconvenience. His gaze traveled to Noah, who watched from the doorway. Kids need stability, a proper roof, schools. Things you can't provide in this dump. Take the money while it's offered. Jack felt heat rise in his chest, not just anger at the thinly veiled threat, but something else. The stones beneath his feet were warming, radiating through his work boots, like he was standing on sun-baked earth instead of morning cool ground. The humming vibration intensified. We're doing fine, Jack said. Thanks for your concern. If there's nothing else, for a moment something ugly flashed across Blackwood's perfect features. Then the mask of civility returned. He slipped a business card from his pocket and placed it on the porch rail. The world can be softened with money. He smiled, or sharpened without it. I'll return when you've had time to consider your situation more realistically. The survey can wait. As Blackwood's Cadillac disappeared across the bridge, Jack picked up the business card. The moment his fingers touched it, the humming from the house surged in volume, becoming almost a growl. Noah appeared at his side, small face serious. He wants to hurt the lake, the boy said. He wants to take the special water. Jack looked at his son, startled. What do you mean the special water? Noah pointed toward the dock, where Jack had seen the blue light. The water that fixes broken hearts. William found it under the lake. That's why he built the house here, to protect it. The bad man knows about it too. He wants to take it all for himself. Jack knelt to eye level with his son. Noah, how do you know about William and the water? Have you been reading his journals? But he knew Noah couldn't have. The old man's handwriting was faded and cramped, difficult even for Jack to decipher. Noah shook his head. The house told me. When I sleep, it shows me pictures, like dreams but real. The walls talk to me. Dad, he paused, then added with childish certainty, they talk to you too. I've seen you listening. Jack couldn't deny it. He had been listening to the humming, to the warmth, to the strange sense of presence that filled their home. It defied logic, contradicted everything he knew about the physical world. Houses didn't talk. Lakes didn't dream. Yet here he was, kneeling on ground that thrummed with energy beside walls that seemed to breathe, watching his son speak confidently of things he couldn't possibly know. When Jack tossed Blackwood's card into the stove, the flame flared bright blue, consuming the paper with unusual intensity. That afternoon, Jack walked to the town hall to investigate the tax situation. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, pulled the records. There's a mistake, she frowned, studying her computer screen. This property only has this year's taxes outstanding, $8,500 due in 45 days. No back taxes. The previous owner had a special arrangement with the county because of some environmental research he was doing. She looked up at Jack curiously. Has someone told you otherwise? Jack thought of Blackwood's smooth lie. Yes, he said. Someone was mistaken. On his way back, he stopped at Martha's Market for supplies. She was waiting for him as if she'd known he'd come. That Blackwood fellow was asking about you, she said without preamble. Wanted to know if you had family resources connections in town. Jack stiffened, but Martha waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry, I didn't tell him anything useful. Never liked that man or his father before him. Too slick by half. She pulled a faded newspaper from beneath the counter. You should see this. It was dated 30 years earlier, the headline declaring, Local geologist claims discovery of miracle water in Pine Lake. Scientific community skeptical. The article detailed William Gardner's assertion that he'd found water with unusual properties in a cave system beneath Pine Lake water that he claimed accelerated healing and had unexplained energy signatures. The scientific establishment that had dismissed his claims as the delusions of a grieving man looking for meaning after losing his family. But there at the bottom was a smaller headline, Gardner refuses buyout from RB Resources. The article noted that despite significant financial pressure from the regional mining and water rights company owned by Richard Blackwood Sr., Gardner had refused to sell his property or rights to the underwater cave system he claimed to have discovered. Jack looked up at Martha. RB Resources, that's Blackwood's daddy's company. She nodded. Now Junior's empire. They've been after that lake for decades. When Jack looked confused, she continued. The mineral rights, whatever's under that water, the Blackwoods want it. William protected it till he died. Now it's your turn, seems like. Jack walked home slowly, his mind racing. He'd bought the house as shelter, a desperate move to get Noah off the streets. He hadn't signed up to be the guardian of some mysterious water source or to stand against a powerful local businessman. Yet with each step toward Pine Haven, he felt the rightness of it settling into his bones. The house had called to them. It had been waiting. Noah was at the dock when Jack returned, staring intently at the water. Look, Dad, he called. Jack joined him, following his son's pointing finger. Just beneath the surface, blue lights danced, more of them than Jack had seen before. They moved in patterns that reminded him of the symbols carved into the stone walls. The lake is trying to tell us something. Noah set his small face solemn in the fading light. It knows the bad man is coming back. The water is rising. We need to be ready. Jack looked from his son to the lights pulsing beneath the surface. What does that mean, buddy? The water is rising. Noah shrugged. I don't know yet. The house is still explaining. He turned his gaze to Pine Haven, its stone walls solid against the hillside blue door, bright in the dusk. It takes care of us, Dad. Now we have to take care of it. Later, as Noah slept, Jack studied William's ledger more carefully, looking for anything that might explain the blue lights, the humming walls, the strange warmth. One entry caught his attention. Cave mapping complete. Primary access point is beneath the hearth. Secondary emergence in lake bed approximately 107 yards from shore. Water rises during seismic activity. Must monitor pressure to prevent structural damage. Jack moved to the fireplace, running his hands over the stones. They were fitted together differently than the rest of the house, more precisely with strange angular joins that didn't follow standard masonry practices. He pressed experimentally, feeling for loose sections or hidden mechanisms. Nothing moved but the humming, intensified, vibrating through his fingertips. A storm arrived overnight, wind howling through the trees and rain lashing against the windows. Jack woke to check for leaks, moving through the dark house with a flashlight. The roof was holding his repairs had been solid, but something else was wrong. The humming had changed, becoming faster, more urgent. 20 seconds between pulses now, instead of 27. A loud crack split the night, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. Lightning illuminated the room in harsh blue flashes. In that stuttering light, Jack saw something impossible. Thin veins of blue energy running through the stone walls, pulsing with each lightning strike, like the house had a circulatory system that was suddenly visible. The floor trembled beneath his feet. Noah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide but unafraid. The water is rising, Dad, he said. We need to go to the hearth. That's the safe place. Jack lifted his son, feeling the boy's certainty as a contrast to his own confusion. Another crack of lightning, another pulse of blue through the walls. The house was shaking now. Not like it was collapsing, but like it was bracing itself. The humming had become a deep vibration that Jack could feel in his teeth. They huddled by the fireplace, Jack's arm around Noah's shoulders. The blue light in the walls grew stronger, concentrating around the hearthstones. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as something shifted deep below. It's okay, Noah whispered, patting the nearest stone like he would comfort a frightened animal. We're here, we're listening. Through the windows, Jack could see the lake churning its surface, broken by what looked like blue geysers erupting from below. The water is rising, he thought, finally understanding. Not flooding, not rain, something from beneath, pushing upward. The house gave a mighty shudder. A stone in the hearth shifted, grating against its neighbors, and fell inward, revealing a small cavity. Blue light spilled out brighter than the veins in the walls, illuminating their faces with its otherworldly glow. The humming localized to this spot so intense that Jack could almost make out patterns in it, like speech just beyond the threshold of understanding. Noah reached toward the light without hesitation. Jack moved to stop him. It could be dangerous, could burn, but something held him back. Trust, maybe. Or recognition that his 80-year-old somehow understood this house in ways he did not. Noah's small fingers brushed the edge of the light, sending ripples through it like it was liquid. He smiled, face transformed by wonder. "The house is showing us its heart, Dad," he whispered. Jack knelt beside his son, staring into the cavity. The light emanated from what appeared to be a small pool of water, no bigger than a dinner plate, glowing blue from within. It pulsed regularly every 20 seconds now, sending waves of warmth and light through the surrounding stone. As Jack watched, transfixed, a single green shoot emerged from the water, unfurling a tiny leaf that caught the blue light and transformed it to emerald, a plant growing from solid stone nourished by glowing water. Noah touched the leaf gently. "See," he said, "life from broken places. That's what the house wanted to show us." The storm outside began to subside, wind quieting to a gentle whisper. The blue veins in the walls faded, returning to solid stone, but the glow from the hearth remained, casting soft shadows around the room. The humming gradually returned to its normal rhythm, 27 seconds between pulses. The house settling back into itself, Jack ran his fingers over the exposed edge of the cavity, feeling the precision of the cut stone. This had been deliberate, a chamber built to house this strange glowing water. William Gardner hadn't been delusional. He'd found something extraordinary and had constructed his home around it to protect it. And now somehow it had revealed itself to them, had chosen them as its new guardians. Noah yawned, the excitement of the revelation giving way to child's exhaustion. "The water was rising because it needed to show us," he mumbled, leaning against Jack's shoulder. "Now it can rest again." He closed his eyes, falling asleep almost instantly, face peaceful in the blue glow. Jack lifted his sleeping son, carrying him back to bed. Outside, the lake had calmed, its surface smooth once more, reflecting the clearing sky. But Jack knew something had fundamentally changed. The house Pine Haven had shown them its secret. The mysterious water William Gardner had discovered that the Blackwoods had coveted for generations, that somehow connected to the lake itself. Tomorrow, Jack would need to learn more to understand what they were protecting and why. He would need to prepare for Blackwood's return, for the tax deadline, for whatever came next. But tonight, watching his son sleep in the gentle pulse of blue light filtering through the house, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Rebecca died: purpose, belonging. He placed his palm against the wall beside Noah's bed, feeling the warmth, the steady hum. "Thank you," he whispered to the house, to William Gardner, to whatever force had guided them here. "We'll take care of it, I promise." As if in response, the humming deepened briefly, vibrating through his palm like a handshake sealing a contract. 27 seconds between pulses. The rhythm of home. Morning light filtered through the patched windows, casting dappled patterns across the wooden floor of Pine Haven. Jack Morgan stood at the kitchen table, measuring and cutting a replacement board with precise movements. Each stroke of the saw followed the rhythm that now lived in his bones, 27 seconds between the pulses that emanated from the walls. The small green sprout by the hearth had grown overnight, its tiny leaves unfurled toward the blue glow that pulsed beneath it. Noah sat cross-legged beside the plant, carefully arranging small stones in a circle around it. The boy had insisted on this task first thing after breakfast, claiming the house had shown him how the stones should be placed. Jack didn't question it anymore. After last night's storm and the revelation of the glowing water, his definition of normal had shifted significantly. "You're doing it wrong," Noah murmured to himself, rearranging a smooth black pebble. "They have to follow the water paths under the ground." The boy closed his eyes, head tilted, as if listening to instructions only he could hear. "There. That feels better." Jack felt a subtle change in the air pressure as Noah completed the circle, a barely perceptible release of tension, like the house had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. The humming deepened, resonating through the floorboards. He returned to his work, mentally cataloging the materials they'd need. The roof would hold for now, but the west wall needed reinforcement before winter. The foundation stones were solid miraculously, so for a structure this old, but the wooden supports had suffered decades of neglect. Jack's expertise as a master carpenter revealed itself in how he approached each repair. He didn't just replace rotted beams. He analyzed load distribution, calculated stress factors, and reinforced junction points with techniques few modern builders bothered to learn. His hands remembered what his mind tried to forget: the pride he'd once taken in creating homes that would stand for generations. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his assessment. He tensed, expecting Blackwood's return, but the vehicle that crossed the bridge was Martha Wilson's weather-beaten pickup. Jack set down his tools and went to meet her, noticing how the humming in the walls quickened slightly at her approach, then settled back to its regular rhythm as if the house recognized her as a friend. Martha stepped out carrying a canvas bag and a folder. Storm gave you some excitement last night, her eyes crinkled at the corners. Half the town saw those blue lights over the lake. Folks are talking. She glanced toward Noah, still absorbed in his stone arrangement. They're saying William Gardner's ghost has returned, or that you've discovered his secret. Jack led her inside, accepting the bag of fresh bread and apples she offered. Martha settled into a chair, her gaze immediately drawn to the glowing sprout by the hearth. Well, now, she whispered, leaning forward. That's new. Noah looked up. It grew during the storm. From the special water. The house wanted us to see its heart. Martha's weathered face softened as she studied the plant, then the circle of stones around it. Just like William arranged them, she nodded approvingly. Your boy's got the touch. Jack placed a cup of coffee before her. You don't seem surprised, Martha sipped thoughtfully. William tried to show me once. The water, the lights. I thought grief had broken his brilliant mind. She shook her head, regret etching deeper lines around her eyes. Should have believed him. By the time I was ready to listen, the house had gone quiet. Wouldn't show me its secrets anymore. Went silent after William died, like it was mourning him. She opened the folder she'd brought, spreading out yellowed newspaper clippings and photocopied documents. After our talk yesterday, I dug through some old files. Thought you should know what you're dealing with. She tapped a brittle news article headlined, Gardner claims unprecedented discovery, living water under Pine Lake. William found it by accident, Martha explained. Was studying geological formations around the lake when he discovered a cave system underneath. Said the water inside had properties science couldn't explain. Could accelerate plant growth, heal injuries, generate its own light and heat. The scientific community laughed him out of their journals, called it the delusions of a man who'd lost his family in a flood and was desperate to find meaning. Jack studied the articles, a chill running down his spine as he read William's quoted words. The house and the water are connected. They communicate. They remember. The same phrases Noah had been using since they arrived. Martha pulled out another document, a geological survey map dated 30 years earlier. Richard Blackwood Sr. tried to discredit William, then buy him out when that failed. RB Resources wanted the water rights, said they'd bottle it as a health tonic. William refused, said the water wasn't meant to be taken from its source, that it would die. The implications settled over Jack like a physical weight. What Blackwood had told him yesterday hadn't been an idle threat or simple real estate speculation. The man knew exactly what lay beneath Pine Haven, and he wanted it just as his father had. Martha nodded toward Noah, who had returned to his arrangement of stones, whispering to them as he worked. Your boy hears it same as William did. The house chose you both. Now you've got to decide if you'll protect it. Jack stared into his coffee, the magnitude of their situation dawning on him. We just needed a place to stay. I'm trying to keep a roof over our heads, food on the table. I don't know if I can fight someone like Blackwood. Martha reached across the table, her weathered hand covering his. Sometimes we don't choose our battles, Jack Morgan. Sometimes they choose us. She slid another document forward, a property tax form, with official county letterhead. I spoke with Joe Anderson. He's a retired attorney who helped William with legal matters years ago. The tax situation isn't as dire as you might think. We can file for a reassessment based on the historical nature of the property. Might buy you some time. For the first time in months, Jack felt a flicker of hope that wasn't immediately extinguished by practical concerns. Martha's words carried the weight of experience and community, things he'd forgotten existed during their years of isolation after Rebecca's death and their subsequent homelessness. He'd been so focused on survival, on keeping Noah safe, that he'd forgotten what it meant to belong somewhere. The house's humming intensified, as if agreeing with his thoughts. Jack looked around at the stone walls, the blue door, the hearth with its mysterious plant. In just weeks, this place had become more than shelter. It had become home in a way their previous house never had, even before the bank took it. Martha left with a promise to return along with Joe Anderson to discuss strategies for handling both the tax situation and Blackwood's inevitable return. After she'd gone, Jack returned to his repairs with renewed purpose, measuring twice and cutting once, each movement precise and intentional. Noah joined him as he replaced rotted boards on the porch, the boy's small hands holding nails steady, while Jack hammered. They worked in companionable silence, punctuated only by Jack's occasional instructions on proper technique. He taught Noah the way his father had taught him patiently, allowing mistakes, celebrating small successes. How to test wood for soundness, how to drive a nail straight, how to sand rough edges smooth. The physical labor cleared Jack's mind, allowing him to process everything he'd learned. William Gardner had discovered something extraordinary beneath Pine Haven, something that defied scientific explanation. The house itself seemed alive in some fundamental way, connected to the water beneath it in the lake beyond. And Noah could somehow communicate with it, understand it in ways Jack couldn't yet grasp. Most importantly, Richard Blackwood wanted it all. The man wasn't just a developer looking for lake property, he was continuing his father's quest to acquire and exploit the mysterious water source. The tax deadline wasn't merely an administrative hurdle, it was a weapon Blackwood intended to use to force them out. Later, Jack studied William's journals more carefully, searching for information that might help them. The scientist's handwriting grew increasingly fervent over the years, documenting observations about the water's properties and the house's responses. Temperature fluctuations that corresponded with emotional states, structural anomalies that defied physics, the consistent 27-second pulse that William had eventually identified as the water's natural rhythm. One entry particularly caught Jack's attention. Rebecca believes the water responds to intention. Tested her theory today, approached with gratitude and reverence. The water's luminosity increased by 43%. Approached with analytical detachment, no change. Approached with acquisitive intent, luminosity decreased and temperature dropped 4 degrees. She may be right, the water somehow reads our purposes toward it. Another page detailed William's discoveries about the cave system. Primary chamber extends approximately 87 feet beneath house foundation, with tributary channels extending to lake bed. Access point beneath hearth connects to central chamber. Secondary access in lake bottom, approximately 107 yards from shore, marked by rock formation resembling a spiral. Water levels rise during periods of seismic activity or significant atmospheric pressure changes, suggesting a deeper connection to underground systems than initially measured. Jack looked up from the journal toward the hearth, where the tiny plant continued to grow visibly, its stems strengthening and new leaves unfurling even as he watched. The stone cavity that had opened during the storm remained exposed, the glowing water inside pulsing with steady light. Noah had insisted they leave it open, claiming the house wanted them to see it. The next morning, Jack took Noah to his first day at the local elementary school. The boy clutched his backpack nervously as they approached the brick building where children gathered in chattering groups. Jack knelt to straighten Noah's collar, noting the shadows under his son's eyes, evidence of another night spent dreaming of blue water and stone walls that spoke in pulses. "You know the house will still be there when you get back, right?" Jack smoothed Noah's unruly hair. "It's waited decades for us. It can wait a few hours while you learn." Noah nodded solemnly. "I know, Dad. But what if the bad man comes back while we're gone?" Jack started to reassure him, but Noah continued, "Don't worry. I told the house to stay quiet if he comes, not to show him anything important." It promised. Jack watched his son walk into the school building, small shoulders squared with a sense of responsibility far beyond his 8 years. The easy dismissal of Noah's claim that he'd spoken with the house, that it had promised anything, no longer came automatically to Jack. He'd seen too much, felt too much in their short time at Pine Haven to discount the possibility that Noah truly was communicating with whatever presence inhabited their home. After dropping Noah off, Jack drove into town to meet with Joe Anderson, the retired attorney Martha had mentioned. Anderson's office was a converted sunroom in his modest home walls, lined with legal texts and fishing trophies. The old lawyer listened intently as Jack explained their situation, his lined face revealing nothing until Jack finished speaking. "So you've awakened William's water," Anderson mused, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad. "I was his attorney for 15 years, you know. Helped him fight off Blackwood Sr.'s attempts to seize the property through legal channels." He leaned forward, eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. "Do you believe it?" What William claimed about the water, the house, Jack hesitated, only briefly. "I've seen things I can't explain. My son communicates with it somehow. And Blackwood knows he wants it badly enough to lie about back taxes and threaten me." Anderson nodded, satisfaction crossing his features. "Good. Because I can help you with the legal battles, but only if you're committed to what you're protecting." He pulled several folders from a filing cabinet. William left extensive documentation with me, scientific analyses, geological surveys, property deeds with specific protective covenants. His finger traced a line on one document. He even established a conservation easement on the property that restricts commercial development or resource extraction. The lawyer looked up, a glint of strategic pleasure in his eyes. Blackwood Jr. probably doesn't know about these restrictions. His father kept their legal defeats quiet bad for the corporate image. He slid the folder toward Jack. We have legal grounds to block any attempt to develop the property or extract the water, regardless of who owns it. But that won't stop them from trying to force you out through the tax issue. Jack stared at the documents, recognition dawning. That's why Blackwood wants me to sell voluntarily. The easements would make it difficult for him to exploit the water, even if he acquired the property through tax auction. He needs me to transfer the rights directly. Anderson's smile was sharp, predatory. Precisely. William was brilliant. He created layers of protection. But they're not foolproof. We need to address the immediate tax concern and prepare for Blackwood to get creative with his efforts to acquire Pine Haven. They spent the next hour developing a strategy, filing for tax reassessment based on the historical significance of the property, applying for a hardship extension on the payment deadline, and documenting all contact with Blackwood in case legal action became necessary. Anderson agreed to represent Jack pro bono, explaining that he owed William that much. Before I forget, Anderson said as Jack was leaving, Martha mentioned, "You're a carpenter. I could use some work done on my deck and garage. Pays fair and I can spread the word to friends who need repairs. Might help with that tax bill." The offer was made casually, but Jack recognized it for what it was. The beginning of community support, something he hadn't experienced since their downward spiral began with Rebecca's illness. That afternoon, Jack picked up Noah from school, listening as the boy excitedly recounted his day. New friends made a teacher who loved science. A library book about underground lakes checked out because the house might like to learn too. Noah's natural resilience had always amazed Jack. Despite everything they'd lost, his son found ways to embrace new experiences with enthusiasm. As they crossed the bridge to Pine Haven, Jack noticed Noah tense beside him. The boy's previous animation vanished, replaced by wary alertness. "Someone was here," Noah whispered. "The house feels different." Jack scanned the property, seeing no vehicles or visitors. But as they approached the front door, he noticed it was slightly ajar. He motioned for Noah to wait on the porch, then cautiously pushed the door open. Carpenter's hammer gripped tightly in his hand. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. The table and chairs stood in their places. William's journals remained stacked by the hearth. But Jack immediately sensed what Noah had detected, a change in the house's energy. The familiar humming had altered, becoming irregular and faint, like a heartbeat struggling after exertion. Dad Noah's urgent whisper drew Jack back to the doorway. The boy pointed toward the hearth. The stone cavity with its glowing water remained exposed, but the small plant that had grown from it was gone, cut or pulled out by the roots, leaving only a jagged stem. Jack felt a surge of protective rage unlike anything he'd experienced before. Someone had violated their home, had damaged something precious and mysterious that had been entrusted to their care. Noah moved past him, dropping to his knees beside the hearth, small fingers gently touching the severed stem. The water's glow had dimmed its usual vibrant blue, now pale and weak. Jack searched the house thoroughly, finding signs of careful investigation, drawers partially open. William's journals rearranged floorboards, tested for looseness. Whoever had entered had known what they were looking for and had been methodical in their search. No random burglar would take only a small plant while leaving valuable tools untouched. It was Blackwood, Noah said with absolute certainty, or someone he sent. He took part of the house's heart. The boy's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. "I promised to protect it, and I wasn't here." Jack knelt beside his son, gathering him into a fierce hug. "This isn't your fault, buddy. We couldn't have known. And look," he pointed to the water which still glowed faintly. "The main part is still here. They couldn't take that." Noah wiped his eyes, staring intently at the damaged plant stem. "It can grow back," he said after a moment, "if we help it. The house says we need to make it feel safe again." Jack nodded, accepting Noah's assessment without question. "How do we do that?" Noah arranged the circle of stones again, adjusting their position slightly. "We need to sing to it," he said simply, "the same rhythm as its heart. 27 seconds. The house will teach us. And so, feeling somewhat foolish but committed, Jack joined Noah in humming a low, steady note for exactly 27 seconds, followed by 7 seconds of silence, then another 27-second hum. Noah conducted with small, precise hand movements, his face a mask of concentration. They continued for nearly an hour, Jack following his son's lead, matching the rhythm that pulsed through the house's very foundations. Gradually, imperceptibly, at first the water's glow strengthened. By the time darkness fell outside, the blue light had returned to nearly its former brightness, and the damaged plant stem had produced a tiny green bud where it had been cut. "It's healing," Noah whispered, awe in his voice. "But it's still scared. We need to protect it better." Jack nodded, mind already formulating plans. Tomorrow they would install better locks, reinforce the windows. But physical security wouldn't be enough, not against someone as determined and resourceful as Blackwood. They needed allies' evidence leverage. That night after Noah fell asleep, Jack examined the spot where the plant had been cut. The cut was clean, precise, made with a sharp blade by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Probably took samples for testings, Jack muttered to himself. Scientific proof of William's claims. He called Martha, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Noah. She arrived within 20 minutes, face grim as she surveyed the damage. "You need to document this," she said, already taking photos with an old digital camera. "Breaking and entering, theft, vandalism. Joe will want these for the police report." Her efficiency was reassuring. Martha had clearly handled crises before. "The police," Jack raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll take 'someone stole our glowing magic plant' seriously?" Martha's expression didn't waver. "They'll take a break-in seriously. And having a report on file creates a paper trail. If Blackwood's behind this, and we both know he is, we need to establish a pattern of harassment early." She paused, glancing toward Noah's bedroom door. "Besides, we don't need to mention the glowing part. Just that a rare botanical specimen was stolen from a historical property." After Martha left, Jack sat by the hearth watching the water pulse. 27 seconds between each wave of blue light. He found himself counting automatically now, the rhythm as natural to him as his own heartbeat. In the dim glow, he studied William's journals again, searching for information that might help them understand what they were protecting. One entry from William's later years caught his attention. The water's properties remained consistent only within proximity to its source. Samples removed from the cave system begin degradation after approximately 48 hours, losing luminosity first, then healing properties, finally becoming inert. Concluded that the energy signature requires connection to the larger system, perhaps to the house itself. This explains why RB's previous attempts to commercialize the water failed. They could never transport it effectively. Jack looked up from the journal, understanding dawning. That's why Blackwood needs the property itself. The water doesn't work if removed from this place. Whatever Blackwood's researchers would discover from the stolen plant sample would only confirm what his father had learned decades ago. To access the water's full potential, he needed Pine Haven. The next morning, Jack drove Noah to school, installed new deadbolts on all doors, and reinforced the windows before heading to his first official carpentry job in over a year, rebuilding Joe Anderson's deck. The physical work was satisfying, allowing him to channel his anger and worry into productive activity. Anderson paid him in cash at the day's end, and as promised, provided contact information for 3 more potential clients in need of skilled repairs. On his way to pick up Noah, Jack stopped at the library to research Richard Blackwood and his company. Blackwood Enterprises had evolved from his father's RB Resources, expanding beyond mineral rights and water bottling into real estate development, particularly luxury lakefront properties. The younger Blackwood had cultivated a reputation as an environmental philanthropist, funding conservation projects and green initiatives that earned him positive press, while his development projects quietly consumed pristine natural areas. This duplicity made sense to Jack now. Blackwood understood the potential value of the water beneath Pine Haven, but needed to control the narrative around its discovery. If he positioned himself as an environmental champion first, any later claims about the water's properties would be received more credibly than William Gardner's had been. When Jack arrived at the school, he found Noah sitting alone on a bench, head bowed. The boy looked up as Jack approached, his expression a mixture of defiance and hurt. "They say I'm weird, Dad," he confessed as they walked to the truck. "I told them about our house and the special water, and they laughed, said I was making up stories." Even the teacher didn't believe me. Jack helped Noah into the truck, heart aching. The world doesn't always understand special things, buddy. Sometimes it's safer to keep certain truths just for people who are ready to hear them. Noah stared out the window as they drove, small face solemn. The house says the same thing. That's why it hid from everyone except William for so long. It was waiting for people who would listen. He turned to Jack, eyes wide with sudden realization. That's why the bad man couldn't take the water. He doesn't listen, he just wants to use it. Back at Pine Haven, they found Martha waiting with two unexpected visitors, a middle-aged couple introduced as the Harrises, former friends of William Gardner. The woman Ellen knelt immediately before the hearth, her expression soft with wonder as she gazed at the glowing water and the tiny new bud growing from the damaged stem. I told William I believed him just before he died, she said, voice thick with emotion. He wanted me to see this, but the house had already gone quiet. It was mourning him, I think. Her husband nodded beside her, one hand resting supportively on her shoulder. Martha explained that the Harrises owned the property adjacent to Pine Haven, on the north side, 50 acres of undeveloped forest that Blackwood had been trying to purchase for years. They'd refused all offers, honoring a promise to William to keep the land wild. We heard about the break-in, Ellen said, turning to Jack. Martha called us. We want to help. Throughout the evening, more visitors arrived, longtime residents who had known William, who had glimpsed the blue lights in the lake over the decades, who had either believed his claims or wished now that they had. Each shared stories of Blackwood's attempts to acquire land around the lake, of pressure tactics and threats thinly veiled as business propositions. Each offered help, legal advice, material, support, community connections. By nightfall, Pine Haven hummed with more than its usual energy. The house seemed to respond to the gathering, its pulse steady and strong, the blue glow from the hearth brighter than it had been since the break-in. Noah moved among the visitors with newfound confidence, answering their questions about the house and the water with the simple directness of a child who knew he was finally being taken seriously. These people believe us, Dad, he whispered during a quiet moment. The house says they're friends. Some of them heard it before when William was alive, but they were afraid to admit it. After the last visitor departed, Jack and Noah sat by the hearth watching the tiny plant bud that had emerged from the damaged stem. It had grown noticeably even during the evening, developing a small leaf that unfurled toward the blue light from below. It's stronger now, Noah observed, because it knows it's not alone anymore. Jack nodded, understanding exactly what his son meant. The isolation they'd experienced after Rebecca's death, the shame of homelessness, the burden of facing each day with no support, all had begun to crack open since they'd found Pine Haven. Connection was its own kind of strength. The next morning brought rain, a gentle, persistent shower that darkened the lake to slate gray. Jack drove Noah to school, promising to pick him up early for an appointment with Joe Anderson to discuss legal strategies. On his way back to Pine Haven, Jack noticed a familiar black Cadillac parked at the general store. He pulled into the lot, decision made before conscious thought. Richard Blackwood was examining pastries in the glass case when Jack entered. He looked up, surprised, briefly crossing his perfectly composed features before a practiced smile replaced it. Morgan, he nodded coolly. Settling in well at the old Gardner place, I hear. Making friends in town. Jack stood his ground, keeping his voice level, despite the anger simmering beneath. Stay away from my house, Blackwood. I know it was your people who broke in. We've filed a police report. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, though something hardened in his eyes. Serious accusations require evidence, Morgan. I was in Portland on business yesterday. His gaze flicked briefly toward the coffee counter, where several locals pretended not to listen. Besides, what could I possibly want with that dilapidated property other than to incorporate it into a development that would improve the entire lake? You want what's under it? Jack replied evenly. The same thing your father tried to take from William Gardner 30 years ago. The water. But it doesn't work the way you think it does, and it's not yours to take. A flash of genuine surprise crossed Blackwood's face, quickly masked. The local folklore about Gardner's miracle water is charming, but hardly the basis for business decisions. I'm simply offering you a fair price for a property you can barely afford to maintain. The tax deadline is, 5 weeks away? His smile returned sharp as a blade. Think of your son, Morgan. What kind of father chooses a crumbling house over a key child's future? The kind who recognizes when something matters more than money. Jack replied, turning to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at Blackwood. William left legal protections in place. Even if you force us out through the tax issue, you can't develop that land or extract anything from it. Conservation easements, covenants, protected status. You'd be buying an expensive paperweight. The flash of anger that crossed Blackwood's face confirmed Jack's suspicion the developer hadn't known about William's legal safeguards. Jack left feeling a small victory in the exchange, but aware that he'd also revealed his hand. Blackwood now knew they were organized, legally advised, and aware of what was at stake. The man would adjust his strategy accordingly. Back at Pine Haven, Jack continued the repairs he'd started the previous day, reinforcing the foundation where moisture had weakened the supports. The work was precise, demanding total concentration, allowing him to process the confrontation with Blackwood. The man's interest in the water was clearly more than folklore or speculation. He'd reacted too strongly to Jack's mention of it, not working the way you think it does. Blackwood or his researchers had specific expectations about the water's properties. Around midday, a truck Jack didn't recognize crossed the bridge and parked by the house. Two men in uniforms emerged carrying equipment cases with County Water Authority emblazoned on the sides. Jack set down his tools, wiping his hands on his jeans as he approached them. "Mandatory water testing, sir," the older man announced, holding up an official-looking clipboard. "New county regulations require testing of all private water sources within the lake watershed. Environmental protection measures." Jack studied their credentials suspiciously. "We don't have running water here yet, just the lake. That's what we need to sample, sir. The lake water adjacent to your property." The man's tone was professional, his demeanor unremarkable, but something about the situation raised Jack's internal alarms. The timing was too convenient after his confrontation with Blackwood. "I'll need to verify this with the county office," Jack stalled, pulling out his phone. The younger technician shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. The older man's friendly expression tightened slightly. "Sir, this is a routine environmental assessment. Refusal to comply could result in fines. We just need a few samples from your shoreline, and we'll be on our way." Jack was about to respond when he noticed Noah's circle of stones near the water's edge, the careful arrangement his son had created, claiming it protected the lake somehow. The technicians were heading directly towards it, equipment in hand. "That area is off limits." Jack called, moving quickly to intercept them. "Private ecological study in progress. University research project. If you need samples, take them from the public access point downshore." The men exchanged glances, a silent communication that confirmed Jack's suspicions. These weren't county officials. The older one attempted one more persuasive smile. "Sir, we really need consistent sampling protocols along the entire shoreline." "I said no," Jack interrupted, standing his ground. "Now show me real county ID, not those badges, or get off my property." His stance shifted subtly, years of construction work having built a physical presence that could be intimidating when necessary. The men retreated to their truck after a few more token protests. As they drove away, Jack noted the license plate number, then called Joe Anderson to report the incident. The attorney confirmed what Jack had suspected. The county had no new water testing program in effect. The men had almost certainly been sent by Blackwood to obtain samples of the lake water near where Noah had seen the underwater lights, the location William had identified as the secondary access point to the cave system. The incident left Jack unsettled. Blackwood was escalating his efforts, becoming less subtle in his attempts to access the water. They needed to be vigilant now, watching for new strategies the developer might employ. That afternoon, Jack picked Noah up from school as promised. They drove to Joe Anderson's office, where Martha was already waiting with several folders of documents spread across the old attorney's desk. Anderson outlined the legal situation in terms Noah could understand, explaining conservation easements as promises the land makes to stay natural, and tax extensions as more time to solve a puzzle. The boy nodded seriously, clearly following the discussion better than Anderson had expected. The lawyer looked impressed as Noah asked intelligent questions about property boundaries and water rights, occasionally referencing things the house had told him that aligned surprisingly well with legal principles. "Can I show him the special book?" Noah asked Jack, reaching for his backpack. Jack nodded, curious. Noah carefully extracted a small, leather-bound notebook they hadn't seen before. "I found it behind a loose stone near my bed," he explained. "The house showed me where to look. It has maps of the water paths under the ground." The book was clearly William's, the same precise handwriting filled its pages, But these weren't the scientific observations Jack had read in the other journals. This was a detailed mapping of the cave system beneath Pine Haven, complete with access points, flow patterns, and notations about energy concentrations at specific junctions. Most importantly, it contained legal descriptions of the underground features that corresponded with the conservation easements, proving that William had specifically protected the entire hydrological system, not just the surface property. Anderson studied the notebook with growing excitement. "This is exactly what we need," he said, glancing up at Jack. "Proof that the protected features extend beyond the property lines under adjacent lands. Blackwood can't touch the system without violating multiple environmental regulations, even if he owns surrounding properties." The attorney immediately began photographing key pages explaining that they would file additional documentation with the county to strengthen their position. The conservation easements William had established were permanently binding on the land regardless of ownership changes, but having this detailed mapping would make them even harder to challenge. As they left Anderson's office, a renewed sense of purpose energized Jack. They had legal protections in place, growing community support, and increasingly a deeper understanding of what they were fighting to protect. But the tax deadline still loomed, $8,500 due in just over a month. His carpentry jobs would bring in some income, but not nearly enough in time. Noah seemed to sense his thoughts. "We'll find a way, Dad," he said confidently as they drove back toward Pine Haven. "The house says money is just energy, and there's more than enough energy in the lake. We just have to learn how to use it right." Jack smiled at his son's optimism, wishing he could share it fully. They crossed the bridge to Pine Haven as the afternoon sun broke through clouds, illuminating the stone walls and blue door with golden light. Home, Jack thought. Somehow, against all odds, they'd found home. But as they approached the house, Jack sensed immediately that something was wrong. The humming that had become so familiar was erratic, surging and fading like a distressed heartbeat. Noah felt it too, his small body tensing beside Jack. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. The hearth with its glowing water remained as they'd left it, the tiny plant continuing its regrowth. But as Jack moved through the house, checking windows and doors for signs of another break-in, Noah called out in alarm from his bedroom. "Dad, the special book is gone, and the stones by my bed are all wrong." The boy stood in the doorway, face pale with distress. "Someone was in my room." Jack verified that the new locks hadn't been tampered with. The windows remained secure. Yet someone had indeed entered while they were gone, someone who knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. The stone Noah had shown him that morning, the one that had concealed William's cave mapping journal, had been carefully replaced but sat at a slightly different angle. The violation felt more personal this time, not just their home, but Noah's private space. Jack pulled his son close, feeling the boy tremble with a mixture of fear and anger. Whoever did this had to have a key or knowledge of the house that let them enter undetected. The list of suspects was short. Very few people knew about the book Noah had found, and only those they'd invited into their confidence. "Someone we trust is working with Blackwood." Jack realized the betrayal settling cold in his stomach. Their circle of allies had a traitor. That night, a storm rolled in from the north, more violent than the previous one, with lightning that cracked across the sky in blinding sheets and thunder that shook the very foundation of Pine Haven. The lake churned beneath fierce winds, waves slamming against the shore with unusual force. Noah couldn't sleep, convinced that the storm was connected to the theft of William's journal. "The house is angry," he insisted, pressing his ear to the wall. "It says the water is rising again, but not like before. Something's wrong with the balance." Jack checked the hearth repeatedly, concerned the glowing water might overflow or destabilize. The small pool remained contained, but its luminosity fluctuated wildly, surging bright, then dimming to a faint glow, no longer following its steady 27-second rhythm. Around midnight, the worst of the storm positioned itself directly over the lake. Lightning struck the water repeatedly, illuminating the churning surface with supernatural brilliance. Through the windows, Jack glimpsed something extraordinary. The entire lake bed seemed to be glowing blue light, pulsing upward through the water in expanding rings centered on a point about 100 yards from shore. The exact location William had described as the secondary access point to the cave system. Noah stood transfixed beside him at the window. "They're trying to force it open," he whispered, "using machines to copy the lightning energy. But they're doing it wrong. The water doesn't want to come that way." Jack was about to question what his son meant when a deafening crack split the night louder than any thunder, more like the sound of the earth itself breaking open. The house shuddered violently. Beneath their feet, the floor vibrated with a frequency that set Jack's teeth on edge, nothing like the usual comforting hum. Outside, the lake's surface bulged upward at the center of the glowing rings, water rising in a dome several feet high before collapsing back with explosive force. The resulting wave raced toward shore, blue light, riding its crest, slamming into the land with enough power to shake the house on its foundation. When the water receded, it left something behind on the shoreline, gleaming objects scattered across the rocky beach, catching the stormlight like fallen stars. Jack grabbed a flashlight and raincoat, motioning for Noah to stay inside. He fought his way through wind and rain to the shore where he discovered dozens of small blue crystals, half buried in the sand and gravel. He picked one up cautiously. It was warm to the touch, humming faintly with the same rhythm as the house, 27 seconds between pulses. In the beam of his flashlight, the crystal glowed from within the same distinctive blue as the water beneath the hearth. Whatever Blackwood's people had done out on the lake, whatever machines they had used to copy the lightning energy as Noah described it, had forced a reaction in the cave system. These crystals had been ejected from below, perhaps from the very walls of the underwater caves themselves. Jack collected several of the crystals in his pockets, sensing their importance without understanding why. As he turned back toward the house, a movement near the bridge caught his eye, a dark figure retreating into the trees, the beam of a flashlight bobbing away into the forest. Someone had been watching them, perhaps waiting to see what the lake would reveal. Back inside, Noah examined the crystals with careful fingers, his expression reverent. "The house says these are its tears," he said softly. Parts of itself the lake had to break off because of the wrong energy. His small face hardened with uncharacteristic anger. "The bad men hurt it, Dad. They're trying to make it give up its water before it's ready." Jack placed the crystals beside the hearth where the blue glow seemed to intensify in response to their presence. The stolen journal, the fake water testers, and now this technological attack on the lake itself, Blackwood, was escalating rapidly, abandoning subtlety for increasingly desperate measures. Whatever he hoped to gain from the water, he needed it soon and was willing to force the issue rather than wait for legal means to acquire the property. The storm gradually subsided, leaving an unnatural quiet in its wake. The house's humming slowly stabilized, returning to its familiar rhythm, though Jack sensed a fragility that hadn't been present before. Whatever connected the house, the hearthwater, and the lake had been strained by tonight's events. Noah finally fell asleep near dawn, curled on the floor beside the hearth, one hand resting protectively near the glowing water. Jack covered him with a blanket, but didn't move him. The boy and the house seemed to draw comfort from each other. As morning light filtered through the windows, Jack studied one of the blue crystals, turning it in his fingers. It contained swirls of darker blue within its translucent structure, like captured smoke or miniature storms. When he held it to his ear, the humming was clear, a perfect match to the house's pulse. Something was coming to a head, a confrontation that had been building since William Gardner first discovered the water beneath Pine Haven. Jack felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders, not just for Noah's future or their home, but for something older and more fundamental. The house had chosen them, Martha had said. Now they needed to prove worthy of that choice. Jack set the crystal down beside the others, watching as the first rays of sun caught their facets, sending splinters of blue light dancing across the walls of Pine Haven. They had just over a month until the tax deadline. 33 days to find $8,500 and develop a strategy to protect the water permanently from Blackwood's ambitions. The odds seemed impossible: a homeless carpenter and an 8-year-old boy against a wealthy developer with political connections and resources. But as Jack watched Noah sleeping peacefully beside the hearth, the small plant continuing its determined regrowth, from the severed stem, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: certainty. This place, this fight, was exactly where they were meant to be. The house's humming deepened in response to his resolve, stones warming beneath his palm as he touched the wall. 27 seconds between pulses. The rhythm of home, the rhythm of promise. Dawn crept across Pine Haven in ribbons of pale gold, illuminating the scattered blue crystals Jack had collected from the shore. He'd arranged them in a circle around the hearth, following Noah's intuitive instructions. The tiny plant continued its regrowth, now sprouting 3 small leaves from the severed stem. Outside the lake lay unnaturally still as if exhausted from the previous night's violence. Jack counted the money in the tax jar. Again, $2,703. Nowhere near the $8,500 they needed in 33 days. His carpentry jobs were bringing in steady income, but not quickly enough. He'd sold the truck yesterday, adding another $1,200 to their fund, leaving them dependent on Martha's generosity for transportation to town. The sacrifice had been necessary, but left them more vulnerable, more isolated. Noah sat cross-legged by the hearth, small fingers tracing patterns in the air above the glowing water. "The circles are broken," he murmured. "The house says Blackwood's machines damaged the underwater caves. Water's leaking into places it shouldn't go." His voice carried the same matter-of-fact certainty that had become familiar when he relayed messages from the house. Jack knelt beside his son, studying the pulsing blue light. "How bad is it?" Noah closed his eyes, head tilted, as if listening. "Not broken forever, just wounded. Like when I fell off my bike and got that big scrape. It can heal, but it needs time. And help." Time was the one thing they didn't have. The tax deadline approached relentlessly, and Blackwood was escalating his efforts to access the water. Jack had spent the night analyzing their options, weighing impossible choices against unacceptable outcomes. He couldn't lose this house not just for Noah's stability or their financial security, but because something profound was at stake. The water beneath Pine Haven was alive, somehow conscious, in ways science couldn't yet explain, and it had chosen them as its protectors. Martha arrived with groceries and news. She'd identified their likely trader, a local contractor who occasionally worked for Blackwood Enterprises, had been asking questions about Pine Haven, expressing unusual interest in William Gardner's old journals. He'd stopped by the general store yesterday purchasing bolt cutters and a pry bar that wouldn't be needed for his legitimate renovation projects. "We should expect another attempt soon," Martha warned, her weathered face grim. "Blackwood's getting desperate. Rumor is he promised his investors access to proprietary water technology by month's end." Her eyes flicked toward the blue crystals arranged around the hearth. "Word's spreading about last night's storm and those things washing up on shore. People are curious. Some are scared." Jack nodded, processing the implications. Their circle of allies was growing, but so was public attention, making it harder for Blackwood to operate in shadows, but also potentially exposing the water to new threats. They needed a more permanent solution than simply guarding the house day and night. Martha had brought blueprints of Pine Haven salvaged from county archives. She spread them across the table, revealing William Gardner's original construction plans. Jack studied them with professional interest, noting the unusual foundation design precisely aligned with geological formations beneath the house. The hearth wasn't merely decorative, it was the architectural centerpiece built directly above what William had labeled primary access point. Most revealing was a notation in William's handwriting at the bottom: "Safeguard mechanism installed per R. Specifications: activation sequence 27 to 391. Jack's carpenter's mind immediately recognized the numerical pattern, prime numbers arranged in descending order of mathematical significance. Noah peered at the blueprints, pointing to symbols etched around the hearth foundation. "Those match the stones I arranged. The house has been showing me the safeguard." "Dad, I just didn't know what it was for." Jack examined the stone arrangement Noah had intuitively created around the hearth. The blue crystals now complemented this pattern, forming a complete circle that pulsed faintly in sync with the water's glow. William had built some kind of protective mechanism into the very structure of Pine Haven, something designed to shield the water from exploitation. The activation sequence was there, but they still didn't understand how to implement it. Martha left to meet with Joe Anderson, taking the blueprints for legal documentation. Jack resumed his work on the house, reinforcing window frames and replacing rotted floorboards. The physical labor helped clear his mind, the familiar rhythms of measuring, cutting, and fitting, bringing order to chaos. He'd constructed houses for 20 years before losing everything. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now fought to save the one he'd purchased for $20. Noah arranged and rearranged the blue crystals, communing with the house in his mysterious way. The boy's connection to Pine Haven deepened daily, his insights growing more specific, more technical. He'd begun drawing elaborate diagrams of the cave system beneath them, mapping channels and chambers he'd never seen with his eyes. The accuracy of these drawings was impossible to verify, but they matched William's notes with unsettling precision. That afternoon, Jack heard vehicles approaching multiple engines, heavy tires on the bridge. He tensed, reaching for his hammer instinctively as he moved to the window. Three black SUVs with tinted windows crossed onto the property, followed by a familiar Cadillac. Blackwood had abandoned subtlety entirely. "Get to the safe room," Jack instructed Noah quietly. The small storage space off the kitchen had been reinforced and stocked with emergency supplies, a precaution Jack had implemented after the second break-in. "Use the phone only if absolutely necessary. Remember what Martha taught you." Noah nodded solemnly, his face pale but determined. "The house will protect me, Dad. But be careful. The water is afraid of the machines they brought." Jack wanted to dismiss this as childish imagination, but experience had taught him to trust Noah's warnings. Whatever equipment Blackwood's team had used during the storm, the technology that had disrupted the underwater caves and forced the crystals to the surface, had apparently returned. Jack stepped onto the porch as the vehicles parked in a semicircle before the house. Richard Blackwood emerged from the Cadillac immaculate in a tailored suit despite the dusty surroundings. 8 men accompanied him, 4 in suits that failed to disguise their security training, 4 in technical gear, carrying equipment cases with scientific insignia. "Quite the welcoming committee," Blackwood remarked, ascending the porch steps with practiced confidence. "I hoped we might continue our conversation from town in a more productive setting." His smile remained pleasant, eyes cold as winter lake water. "Let's dispense with the adversarial posture, Morgan. I know what's beneath this house. My researchers have confirmed what William Gardner discovered decades ago. You're sitting on something that could transform medicine, energy production, even agriculture. Something worth billions, not the pittance I initially offered." Jack stood his ground, acutely aware of his workman's clothes and unshaven face against Blackwood's polished exterior. "You sent people to break into my home, twice. Had someone attack the lake with machines during the storm. Your father tried the same tactics with William Gardner. The answer is still no." Blackwood sighed theatrically, glancing at his security team. "We could handle this unpleasantly, but I'm offering you a genuine partnership. $5 million for mining rights to the water source, with you retaining property ownership and receiving royalties on applications developed." His voice softened, almost sincere. "Think about your son, Morgan. Education, opportunities, security, all the things you haven't been able to provide since your wife died." The mention of Rebecca sent a surge of anger through Jack's chest. How dare this man invoke her memory? But beneath the fury, a flicker of doubt surfaced. $5 million would transform their lives. Noah would never worry about shelter or food again. The tax problem would vanish instantly. As if sensing his hesitation, Blackwood pressed further. "The water's going to be utilized regardless, either with your cooperation and compensation or without. My team has identified the secondary access point in the lake bed. We can extract from there if necessary, though it would be more disruptive to the ecosystem." He gestured toward his technical team, who had begun unloading equipment, specialized drills, sampling devices, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar. Jack thought of the blue crystals of Noah's warning that the water was afraid of their machines, of the house's steady pulse that had become intertwined with his own heartbeat, of William Gardner's lifetime spent protecting this place. "Some things aren't meant to be taken packaged and sold," Jack said finally. "The water doesn't work that way. William's research proved it loses properties when removed from the source. His father's company already discovered that limitation decades ago." Blackwood's pleasant mask slipped, irritation flashing across his features. "Technology advances, Morgan. What was impossible 30 years ago is standard procedure now. My researchers have already developed stabilization methods for the samples we've acquired." His gaze drifted toward the house where blue light faintly glowed through the windows. "We're extracting the first commercial quantities today. Your permission would simplify matters, but it's not strictly necessary." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Jack became acutely aware of the security team positioning themselves strategically around the property. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a coordinated invasion barely disguised as business. "You have no legal right to extract anything from this property," Jack stated, thinking of the conservation easements and protective covenants William had established. "Any attempt to do so will trigger immediate legal action." Joe Anderson has prepared injunctions ready to file at the first sign of unauthorized activity. Blackwood's smile returned colder than before. Legal processes take time. By the time any judge reviews those documents, we'll have what we need. He nodded to his security team. Please ensure Mr. Morgan doesn't interfere with the technical work. Keep him comfortable but contained. Two guards moved toward Jack, their intentions clear. He backed toward the door, unwilling to abandon Noah or the house to these intruders. Inside, the house's humming had intensified, pulsing faster than its usual rhythm, a warning and alarm. Before the guards could reach him, Martha's pickup truck roared across the bridge, skidding to a stop behind the line of black vehicles. She emerged with surprising speed for her age, followed by Joe Anderson and Ellen Harris. Behind them came three more vehicles filled with townspeople, longtime residents Jack recognized from recent gatherings at Pine Haven. "This is private property," Martha announced, voice carrying across the yard. "You're trespassing Blackwood." Joe waved official-looking papers. "We've filed emergency injunctions against any extraction activities on or around the Gardner property. These documents were processed an hour ago." She gestured toward the growing crowd of locals. "And we have plenty of witnesses to any violations." Blackwood's composure wavered momentarily before he recovered, addressing the assembled neighbors with practiced charm. "This situation involves proprietary research and significant potential benefits for the entire region. Mr. Morgan has been unwilling to consider reasonable offers for resource rights that could bring jobs and economic development to your community." Ellen Harris stepped forward, her quiet dignity commanding attention. "My husband and I have lived beside this lake for 40 years. William Gardner was our friend. He discovered something extraordinary beneath these waters, something that wasn't meant to be commodified or exploited." The murmurs of agreement from the gathered residents made it clear where community sentiment lay. Blackwood's expression hardened as he realized the tactical situation had shifted. He conferred briefly with his security team, then turned back to Jack with icy precision. "This theatrical display of small-town solidarity is touching, but ultimately irrelevant. The tax deadline is still approaching, Morgan. Unless you've miraculously found $8,500 in the past week, this property reverts to county ownership soon enough." He straightened his tie with manicured fingers. "We'll continue this discussion after the auction." With calculated restraint, Blackwood ordered his team to pack up their equipment. The technical staff complied reluctantly, clearly disappointed at the postponed operation. As the vehicles departed, Blackwood lingered momentarily. "Don't mistake a tactical retreat for surrender, Morgan," he stated quietly. "That water represents the future of multiple industries. Nothing stops progress, not quaint conservationism, not legal maneuvering, and certainly not sentimental attachment to a dilapidated house." After the convoy disappeared across the bridge, the gathered neighbors erupted in celebratory conversation. Martha organized them efficiently, establishing a neighborhood watch schedule to ensure Pine Haven remained protected around the clock. Ellen and her husband offered their adjacent property as an observation point overlooking the lake, where Blackwood's team would likely focus their next attempt. Jack thanked them, overwhelmed by the support, but acutely aware that Blackwood had been right about one thing: the tax deadline still loomed. Temporary victories meant little if they lost Pine Haven to auction in less than a month. He found Noah emerging from the safe room, the boy's expression unusually solemn. "The house told me what happened," he said, taking Jack's hand. "The bad man will come back when he thinks we're sleeping. He wants to take the water while the moon is dark." His small fingers tightened around Jack's. "We need to activate the safeguards soon, Dad, before the new moon." Jack knelt to eye level with his son. "How do we do that, buddy? We have the sequence numbers from William's blueprint, but not the mechanism." Noah led him to the hearth, pointing to the arrangement of blue crystals and stones. "It's like a lock, Dad. The crystals are keys. The house has been teaching me how to turn them in the right order." He demonstrated moving specific crystals to alignments that corresponded with the numerical sequence William had noted: 27391. "But we need one more crystal, a special one from the deepest part of the lake. The centerpiece. William used to have it, but it got lost when he died." Jack recalled the underwater lights he'd seen concentrated around what William had identified as the secondary access point. If this missing crystal was somewhere in the lake bed, Blackwood's team would likely find it during their extraction attempts. They needed to locate it first. That evening, after most neighbors had departed and Martha took the first watch from her car parked at the property entrance, Jack studied William's journals with renewed purpose. The scientist's later entries grew increasingly mystical, describing the water's consciousness and its ability to choose worthy guardians. William believed the house itself was alive, not merely through some metaphysical connection to the water, but because the stones had been deliberately selected from the same geological formation that created the underground cave system. One passage particularly resonated. The water and the house are one entity separated by phase but united in essence. The master crystal serves as both bridge and barrier, connecting guardian to source while protecting against exploitation. In worthy hands it amplifies. In unworthy hands it severs. Rebecca understood this intuitively, while I required years of scientific observation to accept what she perceived instantly. The reference to Rebecca Williams, Rebecca not Jack's wife, triggered a memory. Martha had mentioned William's wife understood the water's nature instinctively. What if she had taken special precautions to protect the master crystal after William's death? Noah had fallen asleep beside the hearth, his small body curled protectively near the glowing water, an arrangement of crystals. Jack covered him with a blanket, then stepped outside into the cool night air. The quarter moon cast silver ripples across the lake's surface, occasionally disturbed by movement beneath blue pulses rising and fading in the familiar 27-second rhythm. He walked to the shore, studying the underwater lights. They congregated near the center of the lake, approximately 100 yards from shore, too far to swim safely, especially at night. Jack needed a boat, but the old dock had collapsed years ago, and they had no watercraft. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. The boathouse still stands. Ellen Harris approached from the direction of her property, flashlight beams swinging gently. William kept a rowboat there beneath the old willow. Hasn't been used in years, but it should float. Her kind eyes crinkled with concern. You're going out there tonight, aren't you, to where the lights gather? Jack nodded, seeing no point in denying his intention. William believed there's a special crystal in the lake, something Blackwood's team will find if we don't get to it first. Ellen studied him thoughtfully. William used to row out there on clear nights, especially after Rebecca died. Said the water spoke more clearly over that spot. Most folks thought grief had broken his brilliant mind, but I always wondered. She directed her flashlight beam along the shore, illuminating a path. I'll show you the boathouse. But Jack... She gripped his arm with surprising strength. Be careful. William respected the water, but he also feared what it might become in the wrong hands. That's why he built safeguards into the house. The boathouse was nearly hidden by overgrown willows, its weathered structure leaning precariously toward the water. Inside, a simple rowboat rested on angled supports, dusty but intact. Jack checked it thoroughly with a carpenter's eye. The wood was sound, the joints tight despite years of disuse. Together, he and Ellen dragged it to the water's edge. I'll watch over Noah, Ellen offered as Jack prepared to launch the boat. Martha's at the front of the property, my husband's walking the perimeter. The boy will be protected while you're gone. Her gaze drifted toward the center of the lake, where blue light pulsed beneath the surface. William always said the water chooses its guardians carefully. It must see something special in you and your son. Jack rowed steadily toward the concentration of blue light, each stroke measured and deliberate. The small boat glided silently across the still surface, barely disturbing the perfect reflection of stars above. As he approached the center of the lake, the water beneath began to glow more intensely, illuminating the boat's hull from below. Directly beneath him, approximately 15 feet down, Jack could make out a circular stone formation on the lakebed, the spiral marker William had described in his journal. Blue light emanated from its center, pulsing with the now familiar 27-second rhythm, the secondary access point to the cave system. Jack secured the oars and studied the underwater formation. He would need to dive down to investigate, but the water was cold, the depth challenging for someone without proper equipment. Still, they were running out of options. The new moon was 4 days away, the timing Blackwood apparently planned for his extraction attempt, and according to Noah, the deadline for activating the safeguard. Before Jack could contemplate the dive, further movement caught his eye. A concentrated swirl of blue light rising from the spiral formation approaching the surface. He tensed, unsure what to expect, gripping the sides of the boat as the light grew closer. The water directly beside the boat began to churn, not violently, but with purpose, forming a gentle whirlpool that glowed from within. At its center, something solid emerged, breaking the surface with barely a splash and coming to rest against the boat's hull. Jack stared in disbelief at the object, a large crystal roughly the size and shape of his palm, radiating intense blue light that pulsed in perfect synchronization with the hearth water. Unlike the smaller crystals they'd collected from the shore, this one was perfectly formed, its facets precise, as if cut by an expert jeweler rather than formed naturally. The master crystal. It had risen to him, answering some unspoken connection between guardian and source. Jack lifted it carefully from the water, feeling its warmth against his skin, its vibration matching the rhythm that had become part of his own heartbeat. The moment the crystal left the water, the blue lights beneath the surface dimmed dramatically, retreating deeper into the spiral formation as if seeking protection. Jack understood instinctively that he needed to return to Pine Haven immediately. The water had entrusted him with its heart, its most vulnerable essence. He rode with renewed urgency, the crystal secured in his jacket pocket, its glow visible even through the fabric. As the boat neared shore, he spotted Ellen waiting anxiously at the water's edge, her flashlight beam sweeping across the lake's surface. "You found it," she whispered as he dragged the boat ashore, noticing the blue glow emanating from his pocket. William searched for months after it disappeared following Rebecca's death. He believed she had somehow hidden it for safekeeping, ensuring only the right guardian could retrieve it. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. He would be so relieved to know it's found its way back. They secured the boat and hurried toward Pine Haven, where Martha met them at the porch with alarming news. Movement in the woods on the north side of the property, flashlights, hushed voices. At least 3 people approaching through the trees rather than across the bridge. Blackwood's security team most likely conducting reconnaissance for their planned extraction. Inside, Noah remained asleep by the hearth, the houses humming steady around him like a protective cocoon. Jack knelt beside his son, gently waking him. He placed the master crystal in Noah's small hands, watching the boy's eyes widen with recognition and wonder. The centerpiece, Noah whispered immediately, understanding its significance. "The house has been waiting for this. It belongs in the middle of the pattern." He carefully placed the large crystal in the center of the arrangement, positioning the smaller crystals and stones around it according to some intuitive design. The entire formation began to glow more intensely, blue light rippling outward in concentric circles. Jack recalled William's activation sequence, 27 to 391. They had the physical arrangement completed, but something more was needed to trigger the safeguard mechanism. He studied the pulsing light, the rhythm that had guided them since they first arrived at Pine Haven. 27 seconds between pulses. 27, the first number in the sequence. On instinct, Jack placed his hand on the master crystal, Noah's smaller hand joining his. Together, they counted silently, feeling the pulse of the water beneath the house. 27 seconds. Then Jack rotated the crystal 3 precise clicks clockwise, feeling subtle resistance, and then release as something engaged beneath the hearthstones. Noah seemed to understand the process intuitively, turning the crystal 9 clicks counterclockwise at exactly the right moment. Jack completed the sequence with a single decisive turn that locked the crystal into its final position. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the house shuddered, not violently, but with purpose, like a giant inhaling deeply after holding its breath. The blue light from the hearth intensified dramatically, spreading outward through the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. Every stone in Pine Haven glowed from within, revealing intricate patterns and connections previously invisible, a vast circuit built into the very structure of the house. The humming deepened, resonating at a frequency Jack felt in his bones rather than heard. Beneath the hearth, the stone cavity expanded, the glowing water rising to fill a basin that materialized from the reconfigured stones. The small plant that had regrown from the damaged stem suddenly flourished, leaves unfurling, stems strengthening, roots visibly extending into the glowing water. Outside, blue light erupted from the lake, not in the chaotic pattern caused by Blackwood's machines, but in perfect concentric circles emanating from the spiral formation at the center. The light spread rapidly, illuminating the entire lake surface before rushing toward shore, following underground channels that connected to Pine Haven's foundation. Martha burst through the door, eyes wide. The men in the woods are retreating, running back to vehicles parked on the county road. Whatever you've done, they're spooked. Ellen and her husband arrived moments later, reporting that the blue light was visible for miles, rising in a column above Pine Haven that illuminated the night sky. Jack felt the house responding to the activated safeguard, its structure shifting subtly around them. not collapsing or changing shape, but somehow reinforcing itself, stones locking together more securely, wooden beams straightening foundation, settling deeper into the earth. The conservation easements William had established were being physically manifested, the house literally embedding itself into the protected land. Noah stood transfixed beside the transformed hearth, his expression serene despite the extraordinary events unfolding around them. The safeguard is working, Dad, he explained calmly. The house is connecting all the water channels, making them visible. Now everyone can see what needs protecting. His small hand remained on the master crystal, which had locked into place at the center of the arrangement, pulsing with brilliant blue light. By morning, word had spread throughout the region. Dozens of people gathered at the property edge, drawn by reports of mysterious blue lights and underground channels suddenly visible beneath the soil like luminous veins. Local news crews arrived, capturing footage of the phenomenon that would soon spread to national networks. Jack stood on the porch watching the gathering crowd with mixed emotions. The public attention provided a layer of protection against Blackwood's covert operations, but also exposed the water to new threats, new curiosities. Noah remained inside with Martha, the boy unusually quiet after the intensity of the previous night. Joe Anderson arrived with official-looking documents and unexpected news. The attorney's weathered face bore a rare smile as he approached Jack. The county assessor has reclassified Pine Haven as a historical and environmental heritage site based on the conservation easements William established. He handed Jack a formal letter. This classification qualifies the property for tax exemption. The $8,500 is no longer due. Jack stared at the document, disbelieving. The tax burden that had threatened everything: their home, the water, their future, had been neutralized by William's foresight and Joe's legal maneuvering. The immediate crisis had passed, but Jack knew Blackwood wouldn't surrender so easily. The man possessed resources, connections, and a determination bordering on obsession. As if summoned by this thought, a familiar black Cadillac appeared at the property entrance, stopped by the impromptu gathering of townspeople and media. Richard Blackwood emerged, his usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, suggesting a sleepless night. He surveyed the scene with barely concealed fury, noting the news cameras and growing crowd of witnesses. Blackwood spotted Jack on the porch and approached, ignoring the curious onlookers. His controlled facade had cracked, revealing the raw ambition beneath. "You have no idea what you've done, Morgan," he hissed, keeping his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by nearby reporters. "That water could revolutionize medicine, energy production, agriculture. Billions in potential applications, and you've turned it into a tourist attraction." Jack met his gaze steadily. It was never yours to take, Blackwood. William Gardner understood that. The water chooses its guardians. It's not a resource to be exploited. Whatever he saw in Blackwood's expression, rage, desperation, or perhaps something more disturbing, convinced Jack that the man would never truly understand what Pine Haven represented. Blackwood composed himself with visible effort, straightening his tie in a habitual gesture. "This publicity stunt changes nothing. My company holds mineral rights to surrounding properties. We'll extract from there, access the same underground system." He glanced toward the house where blue lights still glowed from within the stone walls. "Your mysterious safeguard is meaningless against modern drilling technology." Before Jack could respond, Noah appeared in the doorway, the master crystal glowing in his small hands. The boy's expression remained calm as he approached, standing beside his father with quiet confidence that belied his 8 years. "The water doesn't work how you think it does," he addressed Blackwood directly. "It dies when you take it away from its home. Your scientists already discovered that. The safeguard just makes the connections visible, so everyone can see what needs protecting." Blackwood stared at the child, momentarily disconcerted by Noah's presence and unusual insight. He recovered quickly, professional smile returning, as he noted reporters drawing closer, attracted by the confrontation. "This is all quite charming, a boy, his father, and a house full of pretty lights. But sentiment doesn't trump progress. Legal maneuvering doesn't stop scientific advancement." He turned away dismissively, but Noah's voice stopped him. "The house says you're afraid," the boy continued, still holding the glowing crystal. "Not of losing money or looking foolish. You're afraid of not being special. The water showed you something when you were younger, when your father brought you here. You saw what it could do, but it didn't choose you. That's why you want to take it and sell it so you can pretend you were worthy all along. The color drained from Blackwood's face, his composure shattered by Noah's impossibly accurate insight. For a moment, vulnerability replaced arrogance, the wounded expression of a child denied something precious. Then the mask returned harder and colder than before. "You know nothing," he snapped before striding back to his Cadillac, ignoring questions shouted by approaching reporters. Jack placed a protective hand on Noah's shoulder as they watched Blackwood's departure. "How did you know about his childhood?" "That wasn't in William's journals." Noah looked up, his expression far older than his years. "The house showed me, when I touched the master crystal. It remembers everyone who ever came looking for the water. Blackwood was just a boy when his father first brought him here. He could hear the house then, but he wanted to own it, not protect it. So it went quiet for him." His small fingers tightened around the glowing crystal. "That's why he's so angry, Dad. He knows what he lost." The following days brought constant activity to Pine Haven. Environmental scientists arrived to study the luminous underwater channels. Geological experts mapped the cave system using non-invasive methods. Media coverage expanded from local curiosity to national phenomenon. Through it all, Jack and Noah maintained a careful balance, allowing limited access to protect the water through public awareness, while safeguarding its most profound secrets. The blue light emanating from the house and lake gradually stabilized, becoming less dramatically visible, while maintaining its essential connections. The underground channels remained faintly luminous, marking the boundaries of the protected ecosystem. Noah explained that the initial intensity had been necessary to establish recognition, but now the water could return to a more sustainable expression of its nature. Blackwood Enterprises issued press releases distancing themselves from Pine Haven, announcing a strategic shift toward conventional water bottling operations in other regions. Behind this public retreat, Jack suspected continued interest, perhaps less direct but no less determined. The conservation easements and newly established heritage status provided legal protection, but vigilance would always be necessary against those who valued profit above preservation. 2 weeks after activating the safeguard, Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and gold. Noah played nearby, arranging stones into patterns that mirrored the underground water channels now visible beneath the soil. Martha had brought dinner, a hearty stew that simmered on their newly installed stove, their first proper kitchen appliance since moving to Pine Haven. The tax jar had been repurposed as a future fund containing money from Jack's carpentry jobs, now booked months in advance thanks to widespread recognition of his craftsmanship. Local interest in Pine Haven had created unexpected opportunities, guided tours of the visible water channels, educational programs about conservation, even requests for Jack to design homes that worked with natural environments rather than imposing upon them. Noah looked up from his stone arrangement, expression thoughtful. "The house says we should invite others who can hear it, Dad. Children especially. Some of them understand the water even better than I do. They need a place where that's okay, where they aren't called weird for listening to things grown-ups can't hear." Jack considered this unexpected suggestion. William Gardner had isolated himself to protect the water, believing secrecy was necessary, but perhaps that approach had created vulnerability rather than security. True protection might come through community, through shared stewardship, through teaching future generations to recognize and value what couldn't be commodified. The hearth inside glowed with steady blue light, the master crystal pulsing at its familiar 27-second intervals. The plant that had begun as a tiny sprout now flourished, its branches reaching toward the ceiling, leaves capturing and transforming the water's luminescence into vibrant green life. Jack realized it symbolized their journey perfectly, something precious growing from what had initially seemed barren and broken. Martha emerged from the house, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "News from town," she announced. Blackwood sold his lakefront properties to a conservation trust. Ellen Harris negotiated the deal. Apparently she had leverage we didn't know about. Her weathered face crinkled with satisfaction. Turns out Ellen's family originally owned most of the land around the lake, including what became Blackwood Senior's first development. There were ancestral burial grounds that were desecrated during construction. She's been building a legal case for decades. Jack absorbed this unexpected resolution, recognizing William Gardner's influence, extending beyond his death through the community he'd cultivated. The house had chosen its guardians carefully, not just Jack and Noah, but Martha Ellen Joe Anderson and countless others whose connections formed a protective network around Pine Haven. Noah joined them, small hand slipping naturally into Jack's. The house says we're going to be okay now, Dad. It says we found home not just for us, but for the water too. His eyes, so like Rebecca's, held wisdom far beyond his 8 years. That's what William wanted all along, for the water to have a home where it could be itself, not just something valuable to take. As twilight deepened into night, blue light from the hearth spilled through windows onto the porch, joining with the subtle luminescence rising from the lake. The house's humming merged with the gentle lapping of water against the shore, creating a harmony that resonated deep within Jack's chest. 27 seconds between pulses, the rhythm of home, the rhythm of belonging. Inside the stone walls of Pine Haven, the small family Martha had brought together for dinner shared stories and laughter, their voices joining the house's ancient music. Outside, the lake dreamed beneath starlight, its secrets visible now as luminous channels connecting earth and water, past and future, loss and healing. Jack Morgan, once homeless, once broken by grief and failure, stood at the threshold between these worlds and finally understanding what William Gardner had discovered decades earlier. The true value of the water beneath Pine Haven wasn't its commercial potential or scientific impossibility. Its worth lay in what it revealed about connection, about stewardship, about the profound responsibility of protecting what couldn't be replaced. The glowing channels visible beneath the soil were merely external manifestations of connections that had always existed between the lake and the house, between guardians, and what they protected, between a father and son, rebuilding their lives from remnants of loss and hope. In the distance beyond the luminous boundaries of their protected sanctuary, the modern world continued its relentless pursuit of progress, profit, and possession. But here, within the stone embrace of a house that remembered kindness, different values prevailed: patience, reverence, and the quiet courage required to recognize when something should remain free rather than owned. Noah's arrangement of stones on the porch now perfectly mirrored the water channels beneath Pine Haven, creating a map of blue light that pulsed with life and possibility. The boy stood back, admiring his creation with the satisfied expression of an artist completing a challenging work. Perfect, Jack acknowledged, recognizing his son's innate understanding of patterns most adults could never perceive. You see things the rest of us miss. Noah smiled, wisdom and childish joy perfectly balanced in his expression. The house says that's why we were chosen, Dad. Not because we're special, but because we know we aren't. His small fingers traced the glowing pattern lovingly. We just needed a home, and the water needed guardians. Sometimes the broken pieces fit together in ways no one expects. On the mantel above the transformed hearth, William Gardner's photograph watched over them, his smile knowing beneath decades of dust. Beside it now stood a newer frame, Jack, Noah, and Martha on the porch of Pine Haven, blue light reflecting on their faces, the house finally awake after years of patient waiting. Between these images of past and present guardians carved into the ancient wood of the mantel, 4 words glowed faintly in the blue light, visible only to those who knew to look for them. It remembers your kindness.